On the 12th of March 1946, there were 4 men who were brought out to their executions inside of Budapest. They were condemned for war crimes and crimes against humanity, and they were taken to the execution post. An executioner and his assistant worked together to bring the lives of Ferenc Szalasi, Gabor Vajna, Karoly Beregfy, and Jozsef Gera to a swift end. Thousands of people flocked to see their executions, and they were men who were completely hated and despised. They were the most senior politicians and members of the Arrow Cross Party, the Hungarian Nazi collaborationist government, who inflicted such suffering in just a matter of months in which they were in power. They had deported thousands of people to concentration camps, where they were slaughtered inside of gas chambers, but each of the men was subjected to pole hanging, and one by one they were executed. Welcome to the Untold Past. Today we look at the executions of the Arrow Cross Party. As always, to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. The Arrow Cross Party was led by Ferenc Szalasi, and they were a far-right ultranationalist Hungarian party, and they were in power from the 15th of October 1944 to the 28th of March 1945. Szalasi was made leader whilst he was locked up in prison, and the party had similar views to the Nazis and fascists in Italy. They received around 30 seats in Parliament in the 1939 national elections, but then during World War II were banned much of the time. But when the end of the conflict came, they rose to power. The regent of Hungary, Miklos Horthy, tried to negotiate peace with the Allies, but the Germans kidnapped his son and forced him to abdicate and appoint Ferenc Szalasi as the leader of the nation of Hungary. At the time in which the Arrow Cross came into power, the Soviet Red Army were already inside of Hungary. But Szalasi's government did not have too much authority, and this focused specifically more in the area around Budapest. The rule of the Arrow Cross was short but brutal, and the execution squads of them slaughtered 38,000 Hungarian Jews, and they worked with Adolf Eichmann to resume deportations to concentration camps, and 80,000 people were sent to the death camps. But the Red Army arrived at the edge of Budapest in December 1944, and a siege then took place, but Arrow Cross members then began to execute many people inside the city, including patients within Jewish hospitals, and many women and children inside of the Jewish poorhouses were slaughtered. They continued to slaughter, and many members of the government tried to flee to save their own lives. Ferenc Szalasi, the leader of the nation of Hungary, was one of those who escaped from Budapest on the 11th of December 1944, and he took with him the royal crown of Hungary, and he managed to get through to Germany. Szalasi was the Prime Minister as well, and he was the one who was the head of the government. He went to Germany thinking that Hitler would give him some form of protection and security. However, he travelled to Vienna and then on to Munich, but the cabinet of the Arrow Cross Party was dissolved on the 7th of May 1945, a day before Germany surrendered, and Szalasi was captured by the American army. He was sent back to Hungary and was brought to stand trial in front of the People's Tribunal, the very courts that he had used to execute many of his enemies. Alongside him, brought to court were some other senior members of the Arrow Cross, who too would find themselves executed alongside Ferenc Szalasi within Budapest. Gabor Vajna was a Hungarian Minister of the Interior, and he met with Heinrich Himmler and other senior SS officials, including Adolf Eichmann during the war, and dealt with the deportations of thousands of people to the concentration camps. He was summoned and encouraged to meet with SS officials by Szalasi, and he was a pivotal cog in the destruction of so many people under the Arrow Cross. When Budapest fell, Vajna also tried to escape to Western Europe, but he was also captured by the American army, and was then tried in Budapest with Szalasi, and he was accused of treason, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. Karoly Beregfy was a very experienced soldier who fought during the First World War and the Second World War, and he would be given command of the Third and First Army. But he experienced a crushing defeat at the hands of the Red Army, and with this he was ousted from power in the military. But Szalasi brought him in from the cold, and he relied on Beregfy with regards to military matters, and Beregfy was then made the Minister of Defence. He was sympathetic to the Arrow Cross cause, but living under German occupation, he had little to no power whatsoever. He was captured also by the Americans, as he had also gone on the run. The fourth and lesser-known official inside of the Arrow Cross who was tried was Jozsef Gera. He was a former children's doctor, and he was involved in organising rallies and different meetings within the Arrow Cross, and he was also a member of the Regent Council. He was also brought in front of the People's Tribunal in Budapest, and all 4 of the men had little excuse for their crimes. They were seen as traitors, men who had willingly sold civilians and Hungarian people, their own, to the enemy, who had then had them slaughtered inside death factories within minutes of them arriving. But all 4 men were sentenced to death for their actions, and their executions were conducted in a rather swift manner. The method of execution for the members of the Arrow Cross Party was pole hanging. This was known also as the Austrian gallows, or the strangling gallows, and it had a number of different steps with it. It was not as straightforward as using the gallows. Firstly, the condemned was forced to stand before their execution pole or post, and this was usually around 3 meters tall. A rope was then attached around the feet of the condemned, and this was pushed through a pulley at the bottom of the pole. Then the condemned was hoisted in mid-air on the pole by a chest sling, and this was secured under the armpits, suspending them. Then the noose was looped around the neck of the prisoner, and was secured to the hook found at the top of the pole. The executioner worked with an assistant, and then he would be stood on the back of the platform on a ledge. He gave the sign to release the chest sling, and with this the condemned then jerked downwards a short distance, and the executioner guided their drop by the foot rope, but the executioner then tried his best to manually dislocate the neck of the condemned. He did this by forcing their head to one side, and he placed the heel of his hand beneath the jaw of the condemned to do this, and increase the force. Some executioners claimed that this was a quick method of execution, and that someone, when performed correctly, could be dead within just a minute. The executions of the Arrow Cross Party members, Ferenc Szalasi, Jozsef Gera, Karoly, Beregfy, and Gabor Vajna, took place on the 12th of March 1946. One by one the men were brought out in front of the Budapest Academy of Music, and they were led out by many policemen. They were taken up to the execution post, and handed over to the executioners, who began the preparation for the pole hanging. They passed the ropes through the pulleys for the men, and then secured the nooses. But the men were not condemned simultaneously, they were executed one after the other, and they were not allowed to witness the other ones being executed. All 4 of the men were executed on the execution pole or post, and then following the drop being released, the executioner then placed a white cap over their heads, so the huge crowds of thousands did not see their final gasps of air and moments. The men were then left on the execution post for some time before they were cut down. The crowd that day in Budapest was so large that people were hanging out of windows to catch a glimpse of the executions. But to them the 4 executed men were horrific traitors who had sold their nation over to the enemy for a matter of months. Let's remember that the Hungarians were part of the Axis alliance for a large part of the war, but the collaborationist Arrow Cross Party were ruthless in executing their enemies, and for this the leaders were all executed. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.